Welcome to Happy Hour, where we're flipping the script on the traditional happy hour. Instead of winding down at the drink, we're here to talk about what actually makes us happy and learn from society's healers, therapists, coaches, elders, spiritual leaders, and everyone in between. Join us as we dive into stories, insights, and tools that help us grow, heal, and support one another. Whether you're a seeker or a seer, this is for you. I'm Anurag, founder of Happy, and this series will be hosted by myself, along with my co-hosts, Mira and Tess, and we're excited to explore new ways to bring more joy and well-being into our lives. So take a deep breath, and let's dig in. Today, I'm so excited to introduce Payal Desai. Payal's been a longtime friend of HPY and myself, and today, in an incredibly vulnerable episode, she tells her story of her journey with mental health, family, and her relationship with substances, specifically alcohol. It's an incredibly vulnerable story, so dial in, and thanks for listening. Dude, so Payal, welcome to Happy Hour.
Happy hour. Let's go.
The hilarious part is I'm talking to a person who's literally sober.
Mm-hmm.
How's that feel?
Well, when you first told me the title, I was like, can we just redefine happy hour? Like, I'm all about redefining. So why do we have to associate it with alcohol?
So
That'll be my thought.
What does that mean?
It means that I used alcohol to fill a bucket to, I think, superficially make me happy. And I have, in the last 4 years of sobriety, learned that was not, that was never really the end goal. Like, that wasn't what alcohol did for me. And so I have redefined what fun means, what happy means. I've redefined what it means to really be in touch with my emotions.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like, since we are talking about happy hour.
Yeah.
What allowed you to really tap into that? At what moment in your journey, history, and story where you're like, hey, I want to stop drinking? And more interestingly, I'm curious, what emotions do you think you were avoiding? Like, what in your life were you trying to escape from? Because I think a lot of people use alcohol to escape. Oh, yeah. So what were you trying to escape? So
I can tell you 4 years in that there were definitely deeper traumas that are just surfacing now. So I've got some work to do, and it's taken me a while to get here. But more on the surface was a lack of confidence. Going into social situations, afraid of being myself, right? So like, we're actually situated right now here, right next to Temple's campus, where I went to college, where alcohol was first introduced to me in my life.
Wow.
And so that's kind of crazy because my 4 years of college were honestly soaked in booze. And I know that this is not an uncommon experience. Everybody around me was drinking. Everybody around me was binging and making lots of excuses for it. And so whenever I talk about those early years of drinking, like, I picture the dorm that's 2 streets down. And I picture when I was first, really indulging.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that it was apparent to me right in the beginning that I drank differently than those around me.
What do you mean?
Had a dependency. I wanted it. I wanted it more than I wanted anything else. So like, it's a different feeling, I think, when you prioritize alcohol.
Yeah.
And I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Sure.
Like, I kind of saw that others maybe weren't reacting to alcohol the same as I did. Like,
Right.
I was blacking out, not remembering the night. How did we get home? What did we eat? Oh, okay. How did I get in my pajamas? So stuff like that.
I'll be real. We've all been there.
We've all been there. You're right. And I was laughing it off, and those around me were too. But I don't know, it didn't sit with me. So it felt different. I think that there's something that comes along with like the hangover after.
Yeah.
And the hangover can just be okay, I feel physically unwell,
Right.
but it can also be guilt and shame. And so when it's guilt and shame, it starts to affect your self-worth. When it starts to affect your self-worth, the whole reason why you were using alcohol in the first place to boost your confidence is now counteracted, right? And so again, the first years of drinking, there were lots of excuses. And so, it was just like college fun. And then I graduated and I became a teacher and I was living with my parents, and the habits continued. But this, again, wasn't like too uncommon for somebody single and in their 20s.
Sure.
I was like hopping off to New York, DC, Philly every weekend to see friends. And I just continued my ways.
Happy hour is like a construction of every corporate workplace.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
After work, you go to happy hour.
But
there's happy hour menus.
100%. You know what I always wondered as I entered this phase of my life was, how do people continue to be in professional settings and drink? Because that didn't show up for me too much. I'm an educator, right? So I'm glad that didn't end up, being a situation for me. But I knew that those around me, my peers, were in more corporate settings where alcohol was really present sometimes in a lot of their work functions. And I was like, how do they do it? Because I could never. I didn't have a limit. I was never able to manage a limit. And I kept thinking as I got older. So now I'm 26, 27. And I'm like, all right, I'll figure out my limit, right? Comes with age.
Sure.
That it doesn't quite work like that. When you have a dependency, when there is an addiction, there is no limit to manage. You can try. I've done it all. I have been like, okay, I'm only going to have 3 drinks and I'm going to tally them. Give me a pen. I'm going to carry a pen in my purse and I'm going to tally it. And then I get to 3 and be like, I'm miserable. I want to drink, because drinking to excess was what I thought was going to make
you escape that inner feeling that you just didn't want to deal with.
Yeah. And it just all got really blurred. I was using it to boost my confidence and to show up and be fun in social situations. But then I was only fun for 20 minutes. And then I was somebody's problem because I was too blacked out to even get myself home by myself. So I was always burdening a friend. I wasn't a very good friend.
Right.
Then I met Hiran and we hit it off. We met at a bar. Yeah. So on the context of alcohol. Yeah. And we enjoyed drinking together.
Sure.
We did long distance. He lived in Texas. And so back and forth, our weekends were pretty booze soaked. And,
totally.
We just enjoyed it.
I mean, literally, there's also boozy brunch.
Exactly. So we would be drinking at 10 a.m., which feels, and I'm not being judgmental, but that feels unreal to me now, just being sober for this long.
Do you think it talks to sort of this idea that who you are, in your being in society, at some level, we all carry this guilt and shame of who we are ourselves, and we have to present an image. Yes. And it's only until we pick up an intoxicant that we're able to, that's the mechanism to get into our inner selves.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then also when that intoxicant is introduced, when you're not even fully developed, right? And so then you don't even have space to grow. Yeah. And it's really thwarted.
Totally.
And that was the case for me.
And it's all modeled in our society, right? Mm-hmm. It's you see alcohol is always the demarker of a celebration. You can invite alcohol anywhere and everywhere. Yeah. And it is invited anywhere and everywhere. People are, our society is so focused on health and wellness. And then I see, yoga classes followed by mimosas. Yeah. And I'm like, what? But I previously would be thrilled by that. For sure.
I'd be like, I earned it. Yeah. I deserve it. It's Tuesday. I earned it.
Right.
It's Wednesday. I had a bad day. I
earned
deserve it.
Yeah.
So that kind of then ties into like, okay, so, we meet and this is our dating life. And then we get married. And every once in a while, somebody would make a comment about my drinking
Right.
to excess. And I'd be filled with shame. But I'd also be like annoyed at that person.
Sure.
I'd be like, why are you so, why do you think that like it's your problem?
Yeah, of course.
Let me be. I'm having fun. I'm living my life.
Yeah.
Because I did have some friends who now looking back were really good friends.
Yeah.
My middle sister used to gently, but not so much, I guess. Like we'd wake up in the morning and she'd be like kind of pushing some questioning on me and being like, what do you remember? She'd there's like specific questions for alcoholism
Right.
and she'd like throw them at me in like a joking way, but not. And she'd be
Mm.
like, we need to talk. And the dreaded, we need to talk.
Yeah.
So let's now pick apart the night and why you acted this way. And this started because she went to Temple too. So this started in our college years.
It's actually really ironic. The school's called Temple.
Right. But yeah, so that all continued into marriage and we were young and what happens is when you prioritize alcohol, you really surround yourself
Of course.
with people who do the same and you pull away from those who don't, because if somebody's going to take issue with my problematic drinking, I don't want to be around you because you're calling me on my shit and I don't want to be called on my shit.
Totally.
And so
It's not funny. That's just like, that's a construction of society.
100%.
No one wants to be called out on their shit.
Nobody.
When in reality, we should actually all be calling each other on their shit.
We should.
Yeah.
And we don't because we don't want to cross the line.
Yeah.
And then when somebody does, we're offended. And then when I moved to Texas.
Yeah. Wait, I'm going to pause your story to call you on your shit. So I've been trying to find a good time to bring this up. So I've been following you for a while. I love your content. And I noticed a shift in a pattern where, since it sounds like you had the ability to sort of quit your job, step out of education, I've noticed a lot more influencing than realness. And
sorry, that cough just came
love
up
making
out of
you feel
nowhere.
uncomfortable. This is great. This is exactly welcome to doing the work. No, but I think it's important in our society to not take things so personally and actually own it. And you're ultimately, what I'm trying to do is evoke an emotion in you and hopefully help you feel that. Because I believe that the more tools that we develop to understand ourselves and understand our inner world, that's how we just actually live a happier life. And so I'm curious, when can we see a little bit more of the real, authentic Payal that I love and that I think everyone who sees you loves? And I'm curious, when I share that, how's that making you feel right now?
I think that on my sorry, but on my journey on social media, there's people who have joined at different points.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's something to be said about that, because I've been online for like 6 years.
Wow.
And so if you have come along at more vulnerable points, then you might be there for that aspect of my life.
Right.
There's a lot of different aspects that I can probably be better at balancing, but I've never niched down. I don't believe in that on my social page. I want to call everybody in and I want to share all sides of me. And if you relate to one versus the other, like, I hope that you'll find some joy, I hope that you leave with something of value. So if that value is sharing something about my marriage and that helped you to navigate a relationship.
Sure.
If that value is the parenting aspect. For a long time, it was teaching.
Yeah.
Being a public educator. So I have a lot of educator followers.
Sure.
And I think about them all the time
Right.
because I'm fresh out of teaching. But slowly, as I move through my life, you know, I'm going to move away from things and towards others.
Right.
So right now in this moment, and I think what you're referencing is like there is some more fashion happening. I did just attend the Amazon
Sure.
Creators Summit.
I mean, recency bias is a thing.
Absolutely. And so my strategy, if I have anything, if I have any strategy on
Sure.
socials, but if I do have a strategy, it is that you are going to see what I'm going through in that moment.
Cool.
You're going to see what I'm feeling in that moment. And that's the only way that, because I do a lot of content. I throw out like 3 to 4 pieces of content a day, and I always am sitting on a stack.
Sure.
But I wait for my emotions to align with maybe something that I've created previously or on spot.
Right.
And then I shoot it out. And so I don't know if that like answers your question.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like a real whole view, I suppose.
I mean, I feel somewhat bad, and I think you...
No, don't.
The piece that I sort of realize is probably as a creator, there's like a mental load, right?
Yeah,
and in
there
some
is.
ways, it's like you have a platform, you talk to a lot of people, and you, at some level, like basically I'm asking you to carry the needs and interests of a very wide audience. And at some level, that can be viewed as in direct opposition to your own authenticity, which is just like what you're going through in life. And so I'm curious, like, what does that feel like?
Well, I think a lot of us who are previously people pleasers are learning to shed that. I am. I'm the youngest in my family. I even, you know, found myself in a relationship where I'm with somebody who kind of is more, if you know Hiran, like he is opinionated, calls the shots. And for a very, very long time, I loved that because I could just kind of float along.
Sure.
And in our marriage, what's shown up is me finding my independence and now us navigating that. And it's been a journey. And I think that it's also helped us to communicate because we're both open to that.
Right.
But yeah, the previous people pleaser in me who always wanted to be, you know, showing up to school and have everything set up for my students and be the teacher that always, you know, like pleased the parents.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pleasing to be done in public education. I want to be like star student. Like you don't get compensated for any of the things that you're doing, right? Like you're not compensated anymore if you show up early or if you're more prepared than your peers. But I wanted to stand out to my admin.
That's
I wanted
a question, like why? I think a lot of people struggle with this notion of perfectionism. If you were to like say, like actually just be like point blank, like where did that come from for you?
Oh, I think that it's like the pat on the back. It's like
shabash.
Yeah, 100%. It's I think for me, if I'm being totally honest, it's like the attention, you know, and as the youngest, like I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I like to be in the spotlight.
Sure.
And so if I'm at a staff meeting and they give me an award or a call out, like, okay, I made it, right?
Yeah. I can relate.
Yeah, I mean that part of it is like I found myself on a social media platform.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you something about social media that I've been thinking about a lot. And I don't know how this is going to go over, but there's almost a sense of like self-centeredness that comes along with anybody who puts their life online. If you think about it, you are spending all day, look at me, look at what I did, and that's the truth of it.
Sure.
So it's a balance of partially enjoying that. There are people who don't enjoy that at all, and they would never find themselves on social media. You have to enjoy it a little bit.
Sure.
And there's like a lot of reels now about like just watching your story back. Like I post on social media just to watch myself
Just to see
back.
yourself. Wild.
And so there's part of it that could be self-centered. There's another part of it that
It's
really
like cultivated narcissism.
a little bit, but then there's a balance to like maybe that's finding confidence. Maybe that's like being so in who you are and being so happy with who you are. Like, is that a bad thing? To finally get to that point where you're like, yo, that's me.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it
I don't
sounds
know.
like it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
You know, and I think there's obviously always power in connection and communication. But when it goes too far and we're not spending that time for independent self-reflection and
Yes.
analysis, I think that's where issues show up. And especially even for young kids and children. I'm sure you've seen in your school. So
Yeah.
curious is like how, you know, people talk a lot about values, right?
Yes.
And, you know, if you talk to therapists and a variety of people, it's often the first place you start. Like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I'm curious is like, how did you cultivate a set of values that you operate by for yourself? And then how did you also communicate that and express that to your students? And then how do you do that for your own kids? Like, what do values mean to you? And are they a part of your toolkit of things that you use to navigate the world? Like, how do you use values? And how does that center you in this crazy social media world that you live in?
Yeah. So I think that it's a big question, right? Because how do we specifically define our values? I think it all comes down to like this one quote, and I'm probably not going to quote it perfectly, but people will not remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Right.
And I have always come back to that. So for my students, that was modeling. I'm always going to think about what I've said and how I've made you feel. And if you think I've said everything perfectly, you're completely wrong. I have overstepped. I have made a joke that took it too far with the kid because I loved having that like banter and that relationship. And you can see it on somebody's entire, you can see if you pay attention to body language, you will notice when you've made somebody uncomfortable. There's a lot of people who walk this earth not giving a shit about how they've made somebody feel. Maybe they're not tapped into that. Maybe they're distracted. I don't know. I've always made it a point to pay attention to that. And so
I noticed when I talked about calling you on your social media.
Yeah,
your arms crossed.
Yeah, you're right. And so body language is a big, big communicator.
Right.
And so I think that understanding how you make others feel can say so much. And then also with that comes the opportunity to impact and to inspire and to use that. Like if I have that presence, right? Or if I know that I'm going to impact you in such a way, like how can I do so positively? That also means like taking so much accountability. And I have apologized to students. In fact, we were on a Google Meet when I was teaching just last spring and you overheard a conversation I had with the young man who was not showing his best self in the classroom, which then instigated me to not show my best self. Teachers are humans. We are human beings. So not every interaction is handled the best. I knew I didn't handle it well, but I knew I could repair it. So I did. I will always do that. So I take that into all my relationships. Like I repair with my kids. They're young, they're 8 and 4, but mom messes up. Mom does things. So does dad. We take accountability. And so I think that that's just a core value.
So it sounds like accountability, trust. What else would you add to that if I had to ask you, what are your 5 values? Top 5.
Accountability, trust, empathy.
Okay.
Leading with intention, like understanding what your goal is. Intentionality. And honestly, kindness.
Yeah, I love that.
Like we don't have enough of it.
Yeah.
Kindness. I was just flying back from Vegas, like mom on the flight with a little baby. You've been there. I've been there.
Yeah.
Just saying, hey, like
You're doing a great job.
Maybe it feels weird, but it's not. You're doing a great job. I had.
It's actually weird to have a human in a giant metal box flying through the air at 800 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And be like, how is this little human feeling?
Yeah. So like any opportunity to be kind is one that I want to take if I can feel present enough to do that, right?
Yeah.
I was also at an influencer conference.
Right.
Okay. So when you're talking about showing up online and doing so vulnerably and authentically and staying grounded.
Right.
I think this is the difference.
Right.
Okay. I have 16 years as an educator under my belt. I have worked for various bosses. I've worked with so many different people.
Sure.
And thousands of students.
Yeah.
And I never did that for the money because don't go into education.
It's like therapy. You don't become a therapist for the money.
But real life caught up to me.
Yeah.
I have 2 children and I thought I was going to see change in this system of public education very naively. My dad was like, "You're going to do what?" Like, I'm like the first public educator in our entire community.
Wow.
In like my parents' town. And so they weren't excited about it.
Sure.
My dad was like, "You're going to struggle your whole life.
Right.
Financially, you're going to struggle.
Right.
You're going to be an English teacher. Like at least pick math or science." And I was like, I went to Temple. I was a math major.
Wow.
Because my dad said, if you're going to be an educator, you will be a math teacher.
So funny how cultural bias goes through.
For the first time, I had C's at the first semester. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So then I went home and I was like, I need to change my major.
Yeah.
And my mom was like, oh my God, change your major. Like do what your heart desires. Totally. And my dad was so mad. And anyway, that's a whole thing. But when I was at this influencer conference, we've got some folks that are like 20-somethings making bank. They're making good money.
Sorry, I don't want to pause before you go forward.
Yeah.
What if you could rewind to that moment?
Yeah.
And go back more, because I imagine there's a lot of young people who might come across our conversation.
Yeah.
It sounds like there was a moment where you felt afraid to disappoint your dad, to switch your major.
Yes.
And if you could go back and tell that younger version of Payal what to say, how you should navigate that, what would you say?
Find the courage to be more honest. In my family, I used my mom to communicate, like as the middleman. So, and that also affected my relationship with my dad.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So one thing I've learned about vulnerability is if you can be vulnerable, sometimes you make other people comfortable to do the same.
Totally.
And even if that's somebody older than you.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We've talked about one of our, shared favorite podcasters, authors, Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. Mm-hmm. And so when I got to see him speak in London, and he talked about his own father.
Yeah.
And how his father was a doctor and would work a full day, come back home for 2 hours, wash up, and basically go do a night shift.
Yeah.
And he said if he asked him again about if you do it all over again, he said he would.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, has the thought crossed your mind that using empathetic lens, right? And we've talked about how in American society, in the sort of the therapeutic world that we live in, how we don't want to take accountability and really push the bounds of empathy. We keep looking at our past.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you think your father's desire for you to succeed was really about his true just love for you and not letting you want to struggle because of his own struggle? And perhaps that own struggle that he went through wasn't his fault. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was just the conditions in which he came to this country.
Yes. I think so.
How does that make you feel when they share that?
I think that probably haven't spent enough time thinking about it that way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the word is forgiven, but
Sure.
I can talk about it in more of a joking manner because I did end up pursuing what I wanted to.
Right.
And I would never regret,
of course,
the time that I spent as an educator. It has shaped my life. It is invaluable to me. Right. But I do think that he just wanted the best for me.
Yeah.
And when he told me, I remember exactly where we were when he told me, you are going to struggle financially. It wasn't because he was being mean. It was because he knew that the state of public education was not going to change in my lifetime.
Sure.
And I don't know, like I wouldn't regret my years in the classroom.
Sure.
But I might shorten them. I spent 16 years until I was able just this year. And I sit with a little bit of like, okay, I'm about to be 39. And now 5 years from now, like what does the online space even look like? Like, is there going to be a place for me? And so what if I had gotten started on this earlier? You know, that sort of thing does come across my mind. But I don't think we can spend too much time like rehashing.
Yeah.
We're here now for a reason in the place that we are. And like, I don't want to live in regret or like think back to what if. I don't think that serves me.
I had one of my wife's best friends told her a great question when it comes to parenting. And her advice was, in any given situation, ask yourself the question of, if whatever you're experiencing, your child is experiencing, what advice would you give to your own child? And how would you shift your operational mode? So I'm curious, as you're raising the boys, they might come across a situation where they want to be in a rock band, or they want to be an artist.
Yeah.
I was with a friend yesterday, and his son literally got admitted to Parsons.
Wow. Yeah.
He failed out his first year. He was living in Paris. So he told his son, come back to Paris and live with us. And he fell in love with the beautiful French girl. And the most remarkable thing I heard from this dad was, he's like, you know what? I realize you're only 18 and in love in Paris once.
I love that.
And I was like very happy, because it kind of, do you think we all live in this world? And I'm curious from a viewpoint on America, is we equate financial success to happiness.
Yes.
And you're an educator. I'm sure your salary wasn't very large. And now you're an influencer and you get a bunch of stuff thrown at you.
Mm-hmm.
All the stuff that comes your way, that might bring momentary happiness. But is that true? Like, how do you define happiness?
So happiness for me is that right now I get to be present. I have afforded, I suppose, myself the ability to have peace of mind and calm.
Yeah.
I did not understand how much anxiety I was carrying, how much of the mental load I was carrying, specifically in the last couple of years when I was teaching. And there were lots of moving parts, and my husband was traveling, and I
remember that,
taking it all on. And I was all like running on empty. So
what was a place you'd go to? Like, for me, it's funny, this is a place I go to, right? When you're in moments of, and I'm just, if you had to give some advice to the people who are supporting moms, and it's very clear that you've carried a lot for a long time, what advice would you give, whether it's a therapist, coach, or even a friend, to supporting a mom who's living in modern American life? What advice would you give? How can we support mothers better?
I think listening. I think just listening. So, you know what? There were so many times where like, nobody could come in and help me. And like, even if you gave me a solution. Why don't you hire someone to help you in the morning? That was like more stressful. Now I have to like delegate tasks to somebody in the morning.
It's not just about doing the task, about doing it with quality and doing it the way that you need it done.
And then like the comfort level of like having somebody come in your home and like help you with your children. I was like, better off I just do it by myself in those really difficult moments.
Right.
And then when I'd go to school and face a boatload of challenges there.
A whole nother set of kids.
Yeah, right. Somebody else's kids. There was nobody who could like pay for support, right? Like it's not like I can just outsource this and outsource that. I was in a phase where I was like, I have to just do it. So here's what helped me. Speaking about it.
Yeah.
And then having a community that I built, right? I did build this online, but you can find that in other spaces.
Right.
And so when I would share and then moms would come in and be like, I've been there.
Yeah.
I get it.
I feel seen.
I thank you for sharing this. I'm in this season too. That's it. That like somehow took a little weight off. And really like my husband too, you know, like
I was going to say,
yeah, like as a partner, when he would come home and he would say, you're off the clock. I'm on. Now he's coming off of travel, which is just like staying in a nice hotel room, right? But like at the same time, travel in his industry is stressful too.
Yeah.
It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of it, like, you know, conference.
You're on.
I just attended my first like work conference, I suppose you could call. I was exhausted.
Totally.
And then when I came home, he's like, yeah, like you just like your social battery is drained and like you're just so on it and my conference was different in that like I had some choice of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to attend. And it was on me how much I wanted to get out of it. His, like he has to be in certain sessions and through the day. Like it's a different industry.
Sure.
But when he would come home and he would put his bags down and say, you go upstairs, you go get a massage. Like he felt guilt. Like there's mom guilt.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about mom guilt. And, you know, sometimes we don't give dads that space.
Sure.
He had dad guilt.
Oh, it's a real thing.
He had dad guilt for sure. And to acknowledge that is important. And then he also would feel guilty that I had taken so much on. And, you know, just be mindful of that. For him to eat, I probably didn't go out and get the massage, okay?
Sure, of course.
But just for him to say, you've done enough, you must be exhausted, he just would recognize that like the struggle was real. He'd text me through the day, you're amazing. Like you got to work by 7:45, dropped both boys off by 7 a.m., that means I was waking up at 5:30 to get it all moving. And then I have my whole day of teaching, right? So I'm like, and I would get to work and he would text me and be like, wow, you're incredible. These words, right? Like when we pour into our partner in this way, it goes such a long way. He's taught me that. I don't naturally pour in to him.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't, because maybe he's always done it for me, but he's taught me to stop and say, dude, you're doing a really great job. Like the way that, so my 4-year-old is a 4-year-old and he's been just showing some big feelings, big emotions, really attached to us, but also needy. And it's just been a challenging phase of parenting for us that we didn't go through with our older one. And just to see my husband show him so much kindness. And even when I'm like, oh, like, here we go again with his mood swings. And he'll be like, hey, you got to approach it differently. Like he needs love. Like Dev needs love. Dev doesn't do well when we scold. Like we gotta be very, very gentle with him. And I'm like, okay. But it's
like, I'm not a gentle parent.
I'm like, my gentle has worn out. Like it's done. I have so much capacity for gentle. But yeah, it's nice to see that.
It was funny because I had a similar situation with Mira. And I heard something which really created a pretty significant shift. Is that we often as parents forget that our children are simply reflections of us.
Yeah.
And that the greatest way to shape our children is by shaping ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm curious that, I imagine there'll be a set of moms and your followers following this, and hopefully they share this with their partners as well.
Yeah.
What is it about being seen and heard? Because I don't think a lot of men understand this.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally we communicate differently.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a conversation with my wife, and we actually broke down using ChatGPT what the communication patterns are and the enculturated ways women communicate very differently than men.
Yeah.
And so what is it about being heard? Because it's not like it's taking less off your plate, but it seems like the relief of it feels like it's taking labor, both mental, physical, and emotional off your plate. So what is it?
So first of all, I think men communicate differently because you were never probably given that as a child.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So your communication is shaped by your upbringing and what you've been given and what society has allowed you, who society has allowed you to be. That's
a wild thought.
Honestly, that's the whole series, the Dusty Sun series. We can do it differently. And specifically as a mom raising 2 boys, from a very young age, if I can tell them, you're allowed to feel this, you're allowed to share this.
Right.
You can be vulnerable. Tell me, I can sense you're angry right now. What does that feel like in your body?
Sure.
I just had a conversation with Carter because he got really upset with me and he was not handling it appropriately at all. He was kind of in my face and he was violating my personal space, to be honest with you. He was like not himself.
Sure.
So something sparked and I let him calm down. And then he came to me and he came and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, okay, but the conversation doesn't end there. I said, you got really angry. What did that feel like in your body? Like,
Sure.
What did that feel like? And he was like,
That's so awesome.
I felt like I just felt like hot. I felt hot inside. Yeah,
Right.
that's how anger feels.
Right.
And I said, okay, so when you felt all of that rumbling inside, what could have made you feel better? Right? So I'm not telling him what to do, right? And I'm not telling him he can't act like that.
Sure.
You can be mad, but you can't be mean.
Right.
So you're allowed to be mad. Let's like validate that feeling.
Sure.
You cannot take that out on me and then invade my personal space. So let's talk about that. But in doing so, it wasn't me dictating to him how to handle this situation.
Sure.
It was me helping him navigate a feeling. And he calmed down and he was able to identify how that felt physically and then maybe how next time he could like help himself to calm down.
Sure.
And I said, you can always remove yourself. Like in our interactions, you're always allowed to remove yourself from the situation, give yourself space and come back. I'm not going to be in your face telling you that you have to, tell me right now, right here, why you're angry.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, totally.
It doesn't work that way for me. I'll tell you that much. When I get angry, I am not ready to talk about it.
You know what's interesting is I've noticed my wife's the same way. And I didn't quite understand the pattern of having to give someone space to like decompress. And I do think there's an element of culture where, and I'm curious your thoughts, is do you feel like in our society, a lot of women aren't allowed to be angry? You're not. Yeah. You're labeled like, she's a bitch. I've totally been this. I've made some very impolite comments to my wife, being like, "Oh, is that time again?" And it's disrespectful because our entire society as men, we generally wake up feeling the same every day. Yeah, and that's just not true for a lot of women. And that's nature. And I think that I'm curious: do you think that pause where like you're upset
Mm-hmm.
and you feel like I'm not my best self.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a cultural element to this of where you're expected to be the mom? You're
Yeah.
expected to be calm. You're expected to respond. And is that
Yeah.
something that honestly we can learn from?
Yeah, I think that you just have to solidly give yourself the permission. It's like an awakening, the moment where you're like, nope, this isn't working for me. It does, I think, require people in your life who are willing to accept that.
Understand that, absolutely.
Right? And understand that. But that comes from communication and somebody who's willing to meet you where you're at and grow with you.
Yeah.
And I would never say like, oh, if that's not your situation, then you need to walk away, because we enter our relationships like in our 20s.
Yeah.
Now, I was a very different person when I met my husband. So I'm grateful that he has been on the journey to grow with me.
Sure.
But that hasn't come without conflict.
Yeah. I mean, conflict's, it's vital.
Of
and
course.
I think it's like showing how to navigate conflict is so essential.
And none of us are doing it perfectly,
Totally.
you know, but it's not cookie cutter either.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about like the self-compassion, because you just talked about allowing yourself to feel these things in the best way possible. How are you showing your boys? Because you're living in I joke with Mira that I want to get a dog.
Yeah.
Because I just need another dude in the house.
Yes.
You know? I'm sure there's some equivalent version for you of this. But how are you showing your boys to hold space?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, as it is when you're with your same gender, sometimes things are just easier because maybe your physiology is all sort of similar.
Yeah.
But how are you teaching them that, hey, I'm mom, I'm different, and I need you to see me?
Yeah.
And I need you to understand me because I'm different than you.
Yeah. I mean, the way that comes to my mind, which I'm sure that this will evolve over time, is honestly talking to them about my period and being really honest about that. I have had many moms of sons ask me, when is it appropriate to bring it up? What do you say? And again, a conversation that evolves, and we can add more details in as they get older. How I speak to Dev about it is different than how I speak to Carter about it, my younger versus my older. But just that it's building empathy for women, right? Like when you're talking about having made comments to your wife about, well, about that time, you know, I've had the same. And I think that when you stop and really understand like how somebody would feel when you haven't validated their feeling and emotion, and you've just given it like, well, that you've just sort of like waved it off.
Yeah.
So you just disqualify it almost,
because
right?
it's a real experience you're going through. The emotion is never invalid.
The emotion, and so when you like say that about it, it's like that emotion wasn't real.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
So now I'm left with confusion of, was I not allowed to act on that, or should I not have? And so that's not a safe feeling. That's not a happy feeling, right?
I mean, there's an element too, not to push back, but analyze it, is that the reality is there are a lot of situations where my wife is feeling, and I'm sure for you as well, she's feeling more sensitive.
Yeah.
Comments that I make or things that I do upset her more.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I think you had a post where it's like, you know, you're getting your period when your husband irritates you a little bit more.
Yeah.
I use that every day in like every month in my family.
Yeah.
And I think, don't you think we should normalize that? Like it's okay. Like it's not, getting a period is just a normal.
Yes.
If there's no period, there's no humans.
100%.
Right?
Yes.
And so at some level, do you think that this defensibility, this defensiveness, this sort of feeling of attack that I think a lot of women experience when it's like, oh, is that time of month? Do you think you have humor. Like you use humor
Yeah.
a lot. Do you think like how can we make those moments lighter?
Yeah.
Because it seems like emotional validation and lightness
Yeah.
are these two things, and chocolate, of course, which is always in the drawer for my wife, are things that is what's required. That's the solution set.
Yeah.
It's not. It's moving it from an attack to a observation.
Right. Let me flip it for you. How would it make you feel if you were having a big feeling and your partner was like invalidating that
Yeah.
or telling you you're being dramatic? How would it make you feel? Or if you were going through something that felt real and you were feeling sensitive and emotional, and then somebody used those words, "You're so sensitive." I think that what we really need to talk about is the fact that these are not female feelings. Men are emotional. Men are sensitive. Why do we have a negative connotation to these feelings? Women can be dramatic, so can men.
100%.
So why is it that we're only talking about female feelings? I want to open that up. I want to talk more about normalizing that a man can say, yeah, I'm feeling like, are there moments where you're more sensitive than others? Are there people that maybe you're around where you're feeling more sensitive? What contributes to that? I know what contributes to it in my body.
Sure.
And yes, that is my cycle.
Totally.
What contributes to it in your body?
I mean, 100%.
So that's an interesting thing to really dive into. And then I think what it does is just it allows for openness and vulnerability and saying, I feel these things. I'm allowed to feel these things. And so do you. So now it's not an attack anymore.
Right.
I don't know.
It's an acceptance. I mean, like, I read this study recently, which actually talked about the impact of hunger in marital conflict, which is really funny. I think the study literally talked about how they gave partners and women specifically a voodoo doll, literally a voodoo doll.
Yeah.
And they said, every time you're agitated with your husband, put a pin in. But what they also did was they put a watch to monitor blood glucose levels. And actually observed that when your blood glucose levels are down, they poke their husband more. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Heron's Instagram handle is Hangry to Say.
It is.
Yeah, that's a thing. So in the same way that we might vilify women for their cycles and that results in emotion, maybe we should start making fun of men for not being able to feed themselves.
Good point. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And I like the way that you use the word vilify, because that's what happens a lot with women and feelings and thoughts and just the way that we move through our lives. And that kind of leads to people pleasing and guilt that we hold and mom guilt and the mental load. And it's all tied together. It is all tied together.
Sure.
So when we allow men to show up the way that they authentically can, right? Then we are also allowing them to be all of those things too, right?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're humans. Like, my favorite thing to tell my wife is that at some point before all the roles that you had on, I wish I didn't know her as a kid, but she recounts the story of how her and her best friend Erin had like a lemonade stand.
Yeah.
And they started like a summer camp. And I was like, little Mira, when she was 7 years old, probably wasn't that different than little Anurag when he was 7 years old. And that's the piece we forget as we like get into our genders of like, we're just humans.
Yes.
We're like humans, and we all have emotions and feelings. And we live in a society where we've genderized emotions.
We have. I saw something the other day, and it started with, it's like a poem, and it was read on a reel, and I was in the middle seat of a flight bawling because I read this, and I couldn't even not, and I just kept reading it, and anyway, it was in another life or in another universe. I would see my father, as a young boy, and I'm not going to like share it accurately, but I'll send it to you later. In another universe, I would see my father as a young boy and he'd be hurting and I would hug him and I would embrace him. Would it be different? And so, yeah, let's go back to when we were all at this age where things weren't totally defined for us, right?
Right.
And that's where I'm at with my boys, that when I'm fighting gender norms and roles, how do you show up authentically you when you feel safe to do so? And I know that the world is gonna throw things at them, and I'm not gonna be able to shield them. But man, in my house, no, this is home. This is safety.
Yeah.
This is where you can call me on my shit and I can tell you, yeah, you're right. You know, like
the hierarchy's not there. It's just family.
Not. And I like when Carter calls me on stuff. Yesterday, Huron and I were in an argument.
Right.
And Carter goes to me, just say sorry.
I mean, you guys were probably just tired.
And I was like, oh my God, we were overexhausted. He was not well the last few days.
Right.
And I was traveling. He was traveling previous to that. We haven't been aligned, right? Like we're not on the same page. And so it's going to take some recalibration. That's like
it's quality time.
That's what it is. And so that's tonight, right?
Yep.
And so we're just like bickering. We're just like at each other. And Carter goes, why don't you just say sorry?
That's beautiful.
And he's like, at school, we just say, you say sorry, but you mean it. You got to say it and you got to mean it. And I was like, I'm not ready.
That's cool.
I told him, I said, I'm not ready. And I want to wait until I mean it. And I think that that's important too, because 100%. A forced sorry is not a sorry. And in that moment, it would have been forced. And I was like, Carter, I'm going to wait till I mean it. And hours later, I meant it.
I love the waiting period.
Sometimes longer than others, but life is life.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think that speaks to authenticity. And I think that's important. Because a surface sorry doesn't mean a whole lot.
It doesn't.
And after a period of time, it's just a lot of sorries. And I've been there. I've just said sorry for everything. But you have to understand it. My wife actually wrote down a apology framework that's sort of everyone loves.
That's great. That needs to be shared.
Yeah. And I'll share it. It's actually, I'll take a picture of the whiteboard. It's on a whiteboard in our kitchen. And it goes, what did you do wrong?
Mm-hmm.
How did it make the other person feel?
Yes.
Why was it wrong? And how are you going to not do this again?
Yeah.
And I'll add one more and it's okay to acknowledge to yourself that you made a mistake.
Yeah.
And you'll move on. And I think that's super important because like in school too, right? Like I have this all the time. I'm sure your boys too. They're playing with some kid, having a good time. They're a little too excited. Yeah. And someone can poke somebody else or do something that's
things escalate. Yeah.
Things escalate. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing applies as humans, Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you is therapy.
Yeah.
So you talked about feeling seen and how important that is.
Yeah.
I think what I've found is I think level one is to be seen.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the internet generally, a lot of your content today probably is about having, through your own authenticity and sharing your stories, having other people feel seen. But the flip side, to me, the second level is actually self-analysis and understanding, say, that need to feel seen. What is it about your experience? What is it about the certain things that you're going through to develop that inner monologue, that inner dialogue? And I'm curious for you, we talked a little bit about therapy and the importance of it and not just going to vent, right? It sounds like you have a community to be able to do that with, whether it's sisters or family, friends, whatever. But actually opening up a window into yourself.
Yeah.
And where are you at in your journey with that? And like, talk to me about doing the work. And then we talked about finally having a time and space to go do that.
Yes. Yeah.
Like where are you at with that?
So when we started the conversation, it started with sobriety, and I didn't really finish out like how that ended up, showing up in my life.
Yeah.
And so it was when I was postpartum with Dev, my second, it was COVID. And I think a lot of marriages were in a struggle at that point.
Right.
Because we were all trapped at home and didn't have personal space. And so, things were showing up for us in a way that they hadn't before. And then I was postpartum. So I was carrying the weight of motherhood the second time around. I found more challenging with my older one at home as a preschooler. So going through that, I just felt that we were in conflict a lot.
Is that what you mean by like things are showing up?
Yes.
And by the way, to give a sense of community, I can very much relate.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I think other people could benefit from it.
Yeah.
How did that manifest?
So,
like, I'm sure there was a lot of frustration, anger.
Yeah, just like the way that even like things around the house would like become so messy and cluttered, and it was like
just a
because
trigger.
we were so tired and up all night. I just felt overloaded. Like my emotions were at an all-time high, but then also I would look around me and there was just mess everywhere.
Yeah.
But everyone was too tired. And the moment you would clean it up, it'd be messy again. And so I was unable to handle that physically. And then the relief or the reprieve was just to drink together. So the moment that like 4 o'clock would roll around, it'd be like happy hour, like let's do this. And then my mood would immediately shift and I'd be like, okay, now I'm fine. And then like the next day, and it wasn't like a daily thing. That's the thing about alcoholism. Like it doesn't mean you're drinking every single day, but when you are, you're doing so in a problematic way.
Totally.
And it was more often than it should have been, for sure.
Did any of the drinking lead to more conflict?
Yeah. And we were struggling with some like friendships at the time too. Yeah. And there was some blame. And so those were some other issues that were just like peripheral, but they were coming up. And we just weren't aligned. We weren't on the same page. I also think there's something to be said about, I wouldn't say, yes, like postpartum depression happens for both women and men.
Right.
Maybe not even the diagnosed label of it, but postpartum feelings and insecurities and weight and struggle. He was going through it too. He had like, with Carter, we were able to sort of still manage our social life, you know, like he was a baby and we'd like take him everywhere. We'd like go stay over at a friend's house and just like take our pack and play and drop him down. And like, like
not we were still optimized for nap time.
Absolutely. We were like, we can be those parents who show up and do all the things. But then like with Deb plus COVID, like we were just not able to like live our life.
Yeah.
And so I think he was struggling through that too. He's a very social person. And so there was that happening. Anyway, we're in conflict almost constantly. And then we're only okay when we're drinking. And the same time in the backdrop, I'm about to go back to school in Texas. And that's a state that's handling COVID very differently. And I'm feeling the pressure of that because there's a lot of unknowns at this point to COVID. The vaccine's not out yet.
Right.
And I have a newborn at home. It's like 3-4 months old at this point in the summer really where I'm about to head back to work. And I'm like inundated. And I'm like, I got to pump. I got to do this. Like there's so much pressure and I'm about to burst. So my sisters, I have 2 older sisters, and Hiren were like, you're not yourself. Like maybe this is postpartum depression and like maybe you need to talk to a therapist. So I did. I've always been like very open to therapy and I probably should have introduced it in my life a lot earlier. But there is, I don't even think I see a stigma in it, but I'm just always like, I'm okay. I'm fine. right? Like I can navigate this on my own. I don't ever give the weight of the issue enough credit.
I'm curious. You have a trainer that shows up
Yeah.
every morning.
3 times a week.
3 times a week.
He's amazing.
Seems like every morning. God, I feel it every time you go work out. You take coaching from someone who can help with your physical health.
Yes.
What is the difference in mental health?
Oh, there is no difference. I think that there really isn't a difference. I think that sometimes I feel like I'm more capable, or I am capable of managing the emotions. And sometimes when I have like bigger emotions, again, I don't give it enough credit.
Sure.
And so then what ends up happening is it manifests in different ways. Also, when I was teaching, educators are overloaded. Educator moms, educator parents are double overloaded. If you told me to think about factoring in therapy or coaching at that point, I would tell you when. On my 15-minute drive home? Well, I'm not going to be juggling driving and like I want to give it my time. I just couldn't. I'm sure I could have, but I just didn't feel like I had the space, and now I do. And so I'm now. It keeps coming up for me where I'm like, I need to sit down and like get a therapist and talk through some of the things happening.
I remember when you had launched your coaching. One of the first clients that was working with you acknowledged something similar.
Yeah.
Where she wanted to do the work, but she didn't feel like she had the space.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to go do that. But what's your advice for people who are in that spot? Because not everybody can sort of be in a spot to be like, hey, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go get the space.
Yeah.
Like, for the community, like what can we help them with?
I think that you made the comparison to my trainer.
Yeah.
I make the time. I wake up earlier. I start my day earlier so that I can make the time.
Yeah.
And the end goal is for me to be stronger.
Yeah.
As I'm approaching 40, I know that strength training is really important for my muscles and my bone density. And I want to be strong for a long time. And so I'm thinking about my future, right? And I'm thinking about my future body. So our mental health is the same.
Yeah.
And so if I could give my previous self in the previous phase of my life, if I could have given myself advice, it would be to not, because I did do therapy very, very briefly. And when I thought I had gotten what I needed to out of it, I just departed from it. But it's almost like maintenance. Yes. And like maybe it won't even be like a weekly session. Like it could be, you can mold it to what it needs to look like for you. I know people who do therapy once a month.
Right.
And it's like it's
a check-in.
It's just a check-in.
Yeah.
It's just a check-in. And anybody, I think, can factor that in. And I could have. I really could have, but I wasn't making the space. So to prioritize it and understand that my mental health can also, if I don't manage it, if I don't work on it, then it's also going to be a bigger beast, and it will have the ability to ruin a lot of what I've already worked on.
Totally.
Right? So like it can come to the point where now I've lost things that I've worked on. Just like working out, right? Like if I take 3 months off now, my muscles are going to give out on me.
Totally.
Like there's going to be regression.
The push-ups hurt a little bit more.
It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of the same thing. The more that we put it off, the more work that we're going to have to do. So, but when I did, I did do therapy very briefly around that time. And it was a therapist that was quickly able to recognize that there was an alcohol dependency. Yeah. And she said to me, because I had said, the only time that I'm really enjoying spending time with my husband is when we're drinking. And she was like, tell me more about that.
It's a very vulnerable and honest thing to say.
Well, it was
hard to admit
yeah,
that.
It was the first time that I was like, I'm on the phone with a virtual, like just,
Telehealth, yeah.
yeah. I don't even know what she looks like. And I'm like, time to spill the beans. Like, I just
How do you
thought
think she felt in that moment?
I don't know. Well, I wish I could talk to her. I didn't know the path that she was leading me on.
Yeah.
So like I didn't really keep in touch.
Yeah.
But if I could call this woman and just tell her like the impact that her words had on me.
Yeah.
So I said that, like,
we'll share this with her, whoever you are.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, right?
Thank you. If you remember me. But she asked, like, why do you feel that way? What do you think is like, and then also like, how often are you guys drinking?
Yeah.
And so I decided to be honest. I was like, this is my moment to just say what I would never say to anybody else. Like, it was like my secret.
Of course.
And I was like, 4 times a week, maybe. Like, we're just starting on a Thursday, Sunday, trickling into Monday. I don't know. Like,
I mean, I commend your liver. I'd be so hungover.
Yeah, I was. And I'm like, it was just like it was not okay. And so I said, I was honest with her. And then she was like, that sounds a little unsafe for 2 young children in the house. She said what I knew to be true. Like, she said what I knew was problematic behavior from me. She called me on it. And I was like, all right, she said it out loud. It hit me like a brick wall because I thought to myself, this is the safety of my kids that I'm compromising. I'm being so selfish. And alcoholism is a spectrum. It is unsafe for many people to just stop.
Sure.
So that's not at all what I would recommend, nor am I in a position to coach on sobriety.
Sure.
But for me, I was able to stop. And the next day I said, I'm done. Now, I had like been done before.
Sure.
I'd been done many times, and then I just picked it back up.
Yeah.
But this time felt different because I was done, not because I wanted to lose weight or not because I wanted to cleanse. It was because
the kids
had enough of my own shit.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm done. I'm done with myself. Like, I'm over making excuses. And so, not with a long-term plan, like just with like, I went into sobriety with, I just need to do this.
Right.
I don't know what my life looks like in a year. I don't know what this is going to take me through, but I inundated myself with podcasts. Like, Angela Pugh was really helpful to me. And then once Angela Pugh has people on her podcast who struggle with alcoholism at varying levels, but a lot of what the guests were sharing, it was too relatable. Every time I was like, so this is a problem. So this is a problem. I needed to see myself in other people's stories.
Yeah.
And that was helpful. And then when
Sounds
I
like
got
a big part of doing the work.
Huge. And it was just like all I was thinking about 24/7. And then from Angela Pugh, I went to Annie Grace, who talks more kind of about the science behind alcohol and like what it does to your body, which was then also helpful because I was like, well, I want to be a healthy person and I want a healthy mind and a body. And so that was kind of like a secondary.
Sure.
And slowly I got online and I started sharing. And then I found a space, a community. I found people who were going through the same thing and too scared to talk about it.
Totally.
And like,
that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The conversations that I had were so powerful at helping me feel seen, but then also doing the same for the person on the receiving end. And a lot of mothers, a lot of South Asians, a lot of teachers. So in all my like demographics that I hit, there were issues with alcohol or people who didn't feel good about the way they drank. Yeah. Because it's not above any of us.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can't manage a limit. I think a lot of people can. Hiran can. My husband can. A lot of people are able to have a healthy relationship with alcohol. I'm okay to say I can't. I cannot have a healthy relationship with alcohol.
I have a challenge for you. Whenever you decide to go back into therapy, I'd be curious to see if through your therapeutic work
Yeah.
as you could understand the deeper level emotions
Yeah.
that were associated with alcohol, the guilt, the shame,
Yeah.
all those elements, I can foresee a day when
Yeah.
you can enjoy in perfect moderation a single glass of wine on your next trip to Italy.
Possibly.
If that's something that you don't want to do.
If it's something I want to do, I have a friend who brings this up here and there, and it's a bit of a trigger, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
I didn't mean to trigger you.
No, it probably did a little. And the reason being is that I've come to this point where I don't really see the point of it.
Yeah.
I really don't.
My parents have not drank their entire life.
I also don't see the point in other substances either that I may have tried and like it just doesn't do it for me. I just don't see it. I think that substance is used as an escape. And I don't know a single moment of my life that I want to escape, specifically not if I'm in the rolling hills of Tuscany, looking off into some of the most gorgeous landscapes,
Absolutely.
which I just did in July or in August. Why would I want to escape?
Well,
so that's my thought.
I'll challenge you. The association in most society, especially American society, is escape.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Europe is devoid of that, but I do think there's an element of art.
Okay.
And that's where, one thing that I learned was, if you look at sort of the Western view of the world, right? Like if you go to church,
sure,
the blood of Christ is represented by wine.
Yeah.
So it's had a different association
yes.
with it. And so I think it really ultimately comes down to intention.
Yeah.
And I think once you become so settled within yourself,
right.
Even a bag of chips with the right intention is very different.
Yeah. I think you're right about that.
Than a bag of chips and, binge watching Sex and the City. I don't know.
Yeah.
Grey's Anatomy.
I think that nothing's totally off the table. Yeah. And like, I have work to do in even 4 years sober is not that long.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. So I still have work to do because.
I'm sure there's I can see some fear.
Yeah, there is. Like, if I had alcohol in front of me, because early on, this is very common in sobriety, is to have these like very vivid dreams that you are indulging. And then for me, it was like in my dream, I would black out and then I'd wake up and be like sweating. And I'd be like, oh my God, I ruined it. I gave up my sobriety. And then I'd be like, that was a dream. So those are like the nightmares that show up.
I didn't even know that.
Haven't had that. Yeah. Haven't had that in a really long time. But I still have fear. Like if I was to drink, not that I would ever feel forced or, but if I felt like, okay, I think I can handle it, I just worry.
Yeah.
I'm not there yet. And I, in my mind, I'm like, I don't need to be.
Yeah.
And the world is also shifting.
Absolutely.
A lot when it comes to sobriety and,
substances.
Yes.
Which is actually kind of great.
That is. So although nothing is off the table,
sure,
I don't think I envision that.
Yeah.
And like going to Italy, right, over the last month, I hadn't gone to Italy as a sober person.
Wow.
We'd been 2 times before, and I didn't know Italy without alcohol. I didn't know Europe without alcohol. But then I had a beautiful trip to Portugal last year.
Gelato's great.
No alcohol. I had a beautiful trip in Italy.
Yeah.
No alcohol. I just got back from Vegas. No alcohol.
That's an accomplishment.
It is.
In and of itself.
But it didn't feel like it, which is good to me because I didn't have the temptation. And I think I'm just in a space of my mind right now where like, I'm the party. Like I don't.
Payal's here.
I'm here. I don't know. I have a good time.
Yeah.
I have a good time. The places I go, I'm enjoying myself.
Totally.
And like, and then when I'm not, I leave. It's an Irish goodbye. Like I'm out. Yeah. I'm back in my hotel room. I came back relaxed. I had room service in my room. Like I did.
Totally.
I enjoyed myself.
Yep. That was me last night. Indo-Chinese.
It's good.
Some Netflix.
That's what I'm talking about. So I don't know. That's where I'm at. But yeah.
Dude, we have talked for a long time and this was an awesome
amazing.
conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Of course.
And I think there'll be a few more of these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks,
All right.
Payal.
Thank you.
Hey, welcome to Happy Hour. This is Anurag and Payal, and thank you so much for subscribing and kind of coming on this journey. If you are someone who likes positivity and good content, give us a follow. And we're really excited. We're here to have real conversations, redefine what happy hour is, because ultimately happiness is a choice. Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with myself, Anurag Agarwala, founder of HPY, and Payal Desai. I hope you took away something inspirational and something valuable you can take away in your life. If you'd like to listen to more episodes, please check out our Spotify channel as well as our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in developing a happiness habit and getting more out of your therapy experience, you can download the HPY app in your closest app store. Thank you so much.